Hey, welcome to the reason 2023 had no videos. Some of you may recall back in 2019, I recorded and uploaded my first playthrough of Danganronpa 2 Goodbye Despair, and I had a blast recording it all and sharing it with the world. Since finishing the series, I could say that my life has changed for the better, as it was what introduced me to the friend group that I had today. I brought the Missing Monday series back in 2022 for a brief mini-series through Danganronpa S, which was again a lot of fun to do. And after all of that, I thought to myself, I'd hang it up there. Just 2 versions of Danganronpa content, and that's that. No need to continue on. However, come the last couple months of 2022, and I was talking in a Discord server about what I'm capable of with drawing, and someone put forth the idea to draw the Danganronpa students and post them on their birthdays. I knew that I wouldn't be able to do that with all the stress that would bring, but it did bring to mind the idea of setting myself a drawing challenge for the following year, and it clicked to me this would be another great use of the Weekly Monday format that was established with Busy Mondays. And so here we are. The culmination of 52 grueling weeks of drawing, colouring and shading, so many students that a few robots too. We have the whole main cast, plus an extra Kamaru to make it 52 even. And in this video, I think it'd be nice to actually chat about each of the drawings, where things went, behind the scenes stuff, and the end result of most if not all of them. So let's just sit back and enjoy. For starters, every character is put into a wheel spinner in order to have a randomized character to draw for each week. Easy to understand, and each of the wheel spins are recorded / spun on the Sunday before the Monday posting of the prior week's drawing. In each of these recordings, because of how roughly the frame rate was on the first spin, I decided to spin the wheel twice so I had essentially 2 choices to choose from with the footage. I don't think I ever chose a second option because it seemed more official to have it be the first one. Plus, the stationary wheel showing what it landed on first seemed like it was cheating people out of a popular character. For prosperity, here is the second picking for each of the wheel videos in order, and what could have been for this entire thing. Additionally, back on rolling for week 18, there was a failed recording of a wheel which I kept because of the fact that Kibo was rolled twice in a row. Because it was around the 3rd mark of the challenge, there was quite a low chance of it even happening, and it sticks out, so I kept the footage. And now to talk about the drawings themselves. Starting all the way back with Ryoma, who had a really detailed sketch in comparison to what I settled with later on, it was around Mikan when I started to utilize placeholder hands and shoes in the sketch, since it would be better to worry about those in the digital drawing. Having a size estimate for those things works out better in the end. It also took around Kamaru and Kyoko for me to settle on a consistent outline size for the whole body with the digital drawing. It was also around then where I started to shrink the outline size for the hands specifically, but only by a slight bit just to be able to keep some detail within them. When it came to picking poses for each of the characters in the challenge, I went for ones that would best represent each character as they came. There were some limitations that I set myself to, like I didn't want to cheat by choosing multiple sprites in a row that had closed eyes or clenched fists, so I kept an eye on how much I was picking them, and again, chose sprites that best embodied the characters. I did start off on a poor foot, as Ryoma only had 1 pair of layers, meaning the overlapping parts and the hat were all just 1 layer. It would have been better if I had put the hat on another layer to get the head shape better, but I hadn't had a system yet for the first drawing. From Gonta onwards, I started getting 2 pairs of layers for each drawing, one for the main body and one for the hair, and that stayed consistent throughout. From Kyoko, I discovered an option in GIMP where I could exchange the colour in all the skin areas of the drawings and change them to a more accurate darker shading, leading to a better skin shading. Sometimes I also do the same with the hair and other parts of the clothing, but I didn't do that nearly as much as I did for the skin shading. Speaking of shading, it was also around the Kyoko week where I started sending screenshots and DMs of the shading layer, blocking everything out on the main colour layer and only revealing the colour layers above it. Most of these turned out looking kinda cool, but after taking the screen cap I would have reordered the layers and then removed the residue lines that were hidden by the colour layers beforehand. Stuff like the head shape before the hair was added on and so on and so forth. It still amazes me that the moment after Ryoma was posted and I rolled the wheel for the 2nd time, it picked Gonta Gokuhara. Not only was he the polar opposite build to Ryoma, but he was also barefoot. So I was thrown into drawing feet right at the start of 2023. He also had a prop on hand that was more complex than a fake cigarette, being the bug box. It also amazed me that after I finished going to enroll the next character, I realized partway through that they too were barefoot, with sandals. So it was like the wheel really wanted me to draw feet. Such is the life of an artist. Yasuhiro was the first of the Trigger Happy Havoc cast to come up, and I realized in making him that the shading they do in that game involves things getting darker on the right hand side than the left, and I was stumped on how I was going to represent that. Ended up with this very complicated gradient layer or two that went around the shading layer. And after posting that and working on the other non-THH characters for the next 4 weeks, I realized that it looked odd to have done it like that, so I decided against doing it again for the remainder of the challenge, besides a couple of noteworthy exceptions. In addition, this was also where I posted a screenshot alongside the main tweets of a Afro Yasuhiro as the placeholder for his hair before I even started drawing the hair in digitally was an outline of an area. So it was very cursed to look at. Mikan is and was one of the fastest drawings that I had completed for the challenge. It only took me 3 total days to complete her. The sketch, the hair, the hands, the everything, all done in such a short time. Her hair also had that gradient thing going on, which I probably didn't need to do. It only looks weird when put next to all the rest of the drawings like you've seen. I'm still quite proud of how the sketch came out for Mikan, and the clothing folds came out great. Overall, one of the earliest drawings I was most proud of. And the doodle, I think, also looked kinda cute. Something I didn't really notice when I started doing the Katsuiki drawing, as well as pretty much a lot of the other drawings in this series, was that the guy just had really yellow shoes. It's not really often you pay attention to the footwear of these characters, because you only see them briefly in trials, and the majority of the time you'll see their top hat. So there were a few times where the footwear of the suits were a surprise to me. The head in the sketch was also quite slim and tall, so I had to fix that quickly. And the doodle of him seemed pretty cool looking, and he was also very wrinkled by the end, which probably explains why I took it to the last minute for him to be finished. You wouldn't think, given his outfit being only one solid color, but there was still a bunch of stuff that needed to be done. Kurumi was the start of the extra detailing that was needed for some of the V3 students, with the spiderweb decal and some of the frills. Kurumi is also currently in the lead for having the most layers for a drawing in total. Not counting the background gradients or the base sketch, she had 13 layers total, from colors to outlines to shading. During the week I was drawing her, there was a post going around on Twitter that was about artists sharing some drawing tips and tricks, and the one that I had saw at the time just so happened to be about the frills on her dress and how to draw them. I then took what that tweet suggested and did it for the frills on her sleeves, and what you see in the drawing is the end result. I also didn't quite realize just how small she was until they made the squared version. It is strange looking at it just from there, but the full drawing is at least still okay looking. And then along comes Kamaru, the only Ultra Despair Girls character because there wasn't space for any more. The interesting thing to note with her is that she actually doesn't have any full body sprites besides her default sprite. Thankfully, with DRS being a thing, there's a near full sprite in the post I was wanting to do, so I had to make this amalgam for a reference and use that for the lower half. It was a bit of a hassle, but in the end I think it came out looking good. The sketch I also did looked really cute, I had to admit. The face definitely is a highlight for me. In addition, having the pose be what it is for Kamaru, I was definitely planning for her to be next to Toko come the collage at the end of the year. It was just locked in because, well, I'll discuss later. As mentioned in the caption of the tweet for Kyoko, I had already drawn her before this challenge, where it was basically the usual doodle style of face and proportions, but with a more detailed outfit. I did it more to test how well I could do posing, and as you can see, the bent leg could use a little bit of work. But that's to be expected when you're training yourself how to draw poses. You get better the more you practice, and this whole challenge is evident with that, as I'll talk about a little later. For this drawing in the challenge though, it was the first time where I had to figure out how to draw a braid. I think it's also around this week where I started shrinking the thickness of the outline when drawing hands specifically, and it continued to surprise me that I was able to make surprisingly competent hands. I honestly have no idea how I managed to do that. Another thing that happened from Kyoko was that I found an option in GIMP where you could change the colors of a layout to another one without needing to redraw everything in that new color. I utilized this feature in all the following drawings so that the shading on the skin sections is more accurate than just having the same dark shading as the rest of the drawing. Sometimes I also changed the hair coloring or some other parts of the drawing, but the consistent change was the skin. While most of me was hoping for Toko to come up on the wheel sooner, like right after Kamaru, it was still pretty soon after Kamaru, being just 1 week off. And I knew for a fact that I was going to be drawing a matching pose for her to go next to Kamaru for the collage, mostly because Tokomaru gives me life. And while I could have gone for an Ultra Despair Girl sprite to match with her, I kept it consistent and went for a Trigger Happy Havoc design anyway. Of course, most of Toko's sprites in Trigger Happy Havoc were not going to be a decent match, so I bent my spoiler rule for a little bit and then drew Genesis Jack instead. I even made sure to do that gradient thing for the face in the drawing, which I'm surprised I was even able to do, given that this is one of the times where I'd only gotten sketched on the first day, and not even gotten started in the outline for the digital drawing. Now, something interesting to note with Sonia is that this is where I noticed that there was another option in GIMP to have smooth brush strokes. So every drawing afterwards looked a little more natural. As well, for the small group of drawings that was happening at this point, this was the third week in a row that I had to draw a braid for a character. Braids! It was at least a small braid going over the head and not one that hangs free like Toko and Kyoko before her. So there was at least some kind of anchoring I could do for the template. Also, look at the hands on Sonia here. I'm still shocked that I'm good at doing hands, it really turns out that way. I'll loosen up on mentioning as we go, I suppose. Coming up to Maki, it's here where I realized that, oops, I didn't know just how bad my proportions were overall. Her legs are way too short, and it would probably look better if I had just extended them out a little more. Looking at the sketch, it's clear that the torso was the main focus and the legs weren't thought about enough. But hey, another thing about Maki is that this is where more complex patterns on the clothing came in, as her bow had some stars on it as opposed to just solid colours. Sure, Karumi's spiderwebbing was the first instance of having an extra layer for colouring, but here was where it was front and centre. It certainly put fear in my eyes for whenever Kaito showed up in the future, and we'll get to him when we get to him. The last thing of note was that I did forget about the colour map exchange for a skin shading until after she went up on that Monday, so I had to take that on the chin and keep going. Ah well, can't win them all. Now, look at the sketch for Byakuya. Motherfucker looks like a penguin the way I drew him. He's a little too squat in the leg area, so as a result I took the legs in the digital drawing and then extended them out to look more accurate. I think it looks way better after doing that, as after what happened to Maki, it's what was needed to get more confident looking drawings. I realized that, hey, it's a digital drawing, you could just fix that shit in post as much as you can to try and get it look more natural. The shading also did a lot of the heavy lifting here, in place of drawing in the manual wrinkles on all the clothing. I find that it's a very handy tool to have going forward. I was also fully expecting the next drawing to be of the ultimate imposter, so I was glad I was able to have him be first and then follow up with the imposter after it. Help with making the caption for him be a lot more coy. One of the things that was always in the back of my mind as I was doing this challenge was that some of these characters have really intricate designs that look cool, but that also it meant it was a bigger pain whenever they turned up on the wheel because I had to draw those cool, intricate designs. V3 happens to have a couple of these intricate designs, and Korekio here is a prime example. The chains and zips all over the place were a big demotivation for me, so I had to leave them until the very last moment I had before. But at the very least, there was hardly any skin that I had to draw this week. It was just a single area to lasso for the color changes. I thought that the doodle I did for him was also kinda good. However, it was at this point in the challenge where my dread came to the forefront. I knew he was gonna be drawn at some point, and it happened to be in the first third of the year. It's from Nagito, where the dimensions of the full drawing start to vary, as the majority of the drawings use the same dimensions as the sketch of 2268 by 4032. None of the drawings were ever widened, and all the square images were the same dimensions throughout. He had to have his drawing size increased because of his hair. That one rogue piece right at the top needed the room to breathe. Like mentioned in the tweet, it's surprising just how competent he came out. Throughout the entirety of drawing him, I was panicking DMs because of how confident he ended up looking. He's probably one of the best drawings of the whole year when you look at them all together. And because the wheel hates me, after Nagito came another Chaos Gremlin in the form of Kokichiyoma. I made sure that his hair highlights were done well, and it was easy enough to get that done as all I needed was an extra layer of color of the main hair color. So it was pretty good that I was able to get that detail done for him. It does look like one of the legs is fatter than the other, admittedly, and it was more instances of the shading doing the heavy lifting with some of the wrinkle work, and there's more evidence of running out of time where the arm shading is pretty basic in comparison. Now it's prop time, as the next character is Mahiru. She has a camera by her side at all times, and that thing requires a few layers in and of itself. It was surprising how I managed to get it to look good, all things considered. I also finished this one a couple days early in a voice call on Discord that went past midnight. It was an interesting thing to get that done, really. The tie was another interesting element for a complicated pattern. It needed more layers as expected, though what's more interesting is that despite needing all those layers to get done, she still only had 10 layers total. Karumi at this point in the challenge still has to leave for most layers for one image, and I don't think she'll be beaten anytime soon. It took 16 weeks, but finally I was given the chance to flex my creative muscles with some Monokuma units. Specifically, it was the Mono Cups from V3 that showed up. Because I knew that I was going to be drawing freeform poses with the Monokuma units, I gave myself an extra day to work on them as I started these sketches on the day that they were rolled. You could tell that Monotaro and Monodam better reflected their actual sprites compared to the others, because the shadows are more pronounced in them compared to the others. Though part of me thought it was funny that Monodam was just one of his own sprites while the others are all doing their own things, and it's not so very well conveyed staircase. I think it's better that I didn't make the steps solid so that the gradient can still be seen in full. Plus, the squared gradient was not the usual radial, instead just a single lateral gradient from right to left in order to reflect the iconic split coloring of Monokuma units. If Monokuma himself came up first, he would have had this gradient, but instead it was his kids that got the treatment. If you count the fact that all these cups were done on different layer groups, then this would be the drawing with the most layers total at 26. In addition, knowing that I was going to be doing the collage at the end of the year and I needed to separate all the cups for that, this is where I created the file in preparation for the collage, in order to separate all the mono cups into one area so I didn't have to do it later on. After them, we have another V3 character, intricate designs, this time the head accessory that Tenko is wearing. I'm pretty sure it took a few days before I decided to tackle them, since I already had to deal with getting the perspective right on the hands before dealing with clothing patterns like that. The bow probably could have been centered a little better, and I might have made the torso a little too long, but the skirt does look good enough, I think. So this is another decent one from the challenge overall, I believe. And you go from one extreme woman to another extreme woman with Mio Iruma. There were a few choices of sprites that I could have gone for, not you, but I decided on the one that had the most cleavage because I'm shameless. During the drawing process, my computer had actually blue screened, which was an interesting thing to have happened. Thankfully around that time enough of it was saved so not much progress was lost. Despite the complexities of the barbed wire and the goggles and all the straps, she only has 12 layers total, one fewer than Kurumi. Compared to most other actual artists, it's a pitiable amount of layers, but I'm far from a real artist, so I'm doing what I can as I go with this thing. We won't see someone with as many as Kurumi for a while still, so we'll keep going with the next character. Drawing Taro was interesting because he's one of the abnormal character designs of the series. Very stout, unique eye design, and an oval-shaped head. I think despite the draw here was the obvious choice, so I got right on into drawing that. The hand was pretty much vital for getting it to look good, and I continued to shock myself with how they turn out in the finished drawings. Doodle looks a little off though, and given that I had to do them on pen, I get no choice to change anything about them, so I take what I get with all of them really. After a whole run of decent drawings with very little going wrong, we hit Leon. There was a whole 3-day period where I did not even touch the drawing. It was left unfinished for about half a week, leaving me to have less time in order to complete it. Because of the circumstances, there had to be some corners that had to be cut, and you can see it in the finished product, most notably with his t-shirt design. At the very least, I was able to get something together in time to be able to keep going with it all. Good thing that the sprite I chose to do meant one less eye and hand I needed to worry about. Picking up from Leon though, we have Samugi. During the week I had to draw her, I also had to put together a gazebo for the garden. And while I was out there, I got some real bad sunburn on my thighs, which was quite a pain for a few days. I wouldn't have brought this up if not for me saying it as much in tweets, so it's a noteworthy part of the process, I assure you. It might have played into the 2 days I didn't work on the drawing, that's my only guess. No idea why the doodle has so much space to it, I didn't think she was gonna need all that. Though the viewer's right leg does look a little weird in hindsight, and the hands seem a little too thin, but I should expect to see areas that don't look good after so many more drawings after it came and went. And then Dread happened, because Kaito showed up on the wheel. I knew there was no way of drawing the inside of his jacket, so I had to pick a sprite that also took into account just how much of that was showing. Though after picking the sprite, it was during the digital drawing that I realized that his shoes also had the same space pattern on it. Understandably, this pattern was one of the last things I did with the drawing, and even then I took liberties, like what before I ended up with Leon's t-shirt. It is surprising how nice it turned out, really. I thought it was going to look a lot worse. I'm also kind of proud of the actual shirt design as well. I think the way I did the face looked pretty good. And speaking of detailed drawings, Hiyoko Saionji! I almost had her finished in the same amount of time it took for Mikan to get finished, ironically. However, getting her kimono decal to look good took some extra effort. I suppose the main reason it was easy to get Hiyoko done was that a lot of the body shape is basically a rectangle, and then you have a couple arcs of the hair. This one's a decent example for why the sketches are what they are, and why I kept showing them. You should look at the head shape in the sketch, and you compare it to the finished drawing, and you can see that it helps to have a tool like Ctrl-Z instead of an eraser, as well as other tools to help you get proportions looking okay. I still find it very funny that it took half the year before the first protagonist showed up, and it was Kaede that was the one to pull the trigger. I think the face that I ended up with wasn't properly done, in that I probably should have moved the facial features a little to the right to reflect the slight turn to the left. It looks very off if you look at the drawing now and compare it to everything else. It looked fine at the time, but now it doesn't look that great. The hands are also a bit too large, and I should have shrunk them down a bit. But despite those couple of gripes, however, I think the sheet music skirt looks kinda good. When I seen Tricky to do a face value, it really wasn't all that bad. For the halfway mark in the challenge, I definitely didn't expect it to be Kiyotaka. And I also wasn't expecting to use the default sprite for once. It just happened to be the case that none of the other sprites seemed like something I could do, nor would it be a good representation for the character, so I took the basic bitch option. Good thing he just stands upright and looks stern. The sketch makes him look like a complete matchstick though, so thankfully it fixed him up nicely. I also felt it was fitting to have his doodle salute. Don't know why, just please make up for the boring sprite choice. I was so thankful that Mundo showed up right after Kiyotaka. It was really perfect that it went that way. The sketch was a disaster for him, however, I'll say that up front. He looks like he slouches 24/7 and wears a fanny pack everywhere. Of course, the fanny pack is just the template for the belt buckle, as that thing is quite detailed and it was better to spend more time digitally on it than waste all that time on a sketch that won't be final. The doodle was also a bit scuffed in the outcome, since I decided to start with his hair instead of the face hair head like I normally would do with the rest of the doodles. One was also another case of running out of time to finish him, as well as having the shading cover the bases in some areas. I wouldn't outright say he's the worst drawing of the lot, but there's potential lost on him. Coming on to Akane, she needed more space in her drawing because of the hair and also the elbow, though in all fairness, that elbow is probably sticking a bit too far out. It still looks okay though, but then you look down at the legs and you realise that probably the shoes are a bit too small. But that's all nothing when you compare it to the sketch that I did. Look at this thing. The proportions I did for that thing were way off model, so that's why I was certain that doing all the drawings digitally was the best idea for the challenge. I probably should have made the waist area a little thinner too, it seems very tubish from what I left it as. And also, by the way, there was some booby shine I had to draw. It was part of the sprite already, it was vital to do. Then we have our next protagonist, Makoto, everyone's favorite homeboy. My laptop heavily shat the bed during the beginning of the week. Think of what happened to Leon, except this time it wasn't motivation that caused me to not work on the drawing, it was technology. Because it has been the case for him, I had to rush out a lot of him by the end of the week. And you could tell by the hair and the shading. I would have probably made the hair a tiny bit taller, and also make the clenched fist a bit bigger, and then spend the rest of the time getting the shading to look better overall. The sketch from Makoto was kinda funny though, and the doodle makes him look like a dummy. That's what he gets for being unable to have big hair. Everyone's favorite girl, Chiaki Nanami. Hair was far too small in the sketch, and the chest needed some more work. But at least the general proportion sizes are looking better after spoiling the challenge. Maybe the viewer's right ankle could have been a bit bigger to match the other one, but I don't think there's much else I would change in this drawing now. Was I glad that I didn't have to draw the whole hand for her? Yes. Was I glad to have got the chest looking spot on? Also yes. The doodle had a bit of a slim body too, by the time I noticed it was too late to fix it. That wasn't the last time we'd have a matchstick doodle. Now, if you followed the every 5-week community posts that I did to accompany the challenge with the YouTube audience, you may recall that this batch happened to be the one where I started to hit burnout. It didn't quite start with Rantaro, but I knew for a fact that the shirt was going to take some time to get right. I knew from the get-go that there needed to be another couple layers for the stripes and the big sundial decal. I managed to get them looking good. The hair was a pain because of how unkempt he is, plus he has all those piercings and there's that weird clip next to his shoulder, so it was very much an intricate drawing all around. But it couldn't get any worse after him, could it? It very much could. Celestia Lunenburg showed up right after, and I knew for a fact that I was dreading her the whole time I was doing the challenge. I love her design, I truly do. She was my initial favourite when I first played Trigger Happy Havoc. But it's only when you're tasked to draw that within a week with the level of motivation that I had, that it basically meant that you had to cut corners. And corners were cut. The frills on the dress, the hair curls which duplicated and flipped around, and the intricate lines on the curls had to be omitted for my sanity. Admittedly, the sketch's interpretation of the curls were quite good. If I had more time, I probably would have tried to go for another sprite than the default design again. But I think I made the right choice here. Junko was next to show up on the wheel, and while her hair wasn't as bad as what Celeste had, it was still complicated to get done. For those who were astute enough to notice, I actually used the sprite from Goodbye Despair instead of Trigger Happy Havoc, and that's because she basically doubled in sprites between the two games, including some that were more normal compared to just alternate personalities. Back to the drawing, it was around this point where I started to beat myself up for wasting time instead of working on the drawing. It meant that I had to take even more shortcuts in order to get something out by the Monday, which you could see by the shading on most of the body. The eyes, however, I do think look pretty good despite all the issues, and the outline for everything looks pretty good too. I suppose it's just the catch-22 that was happening because burnout meant I wasn't working on the drawings, but then I would be mad at myself for not working on the drawings. It's also very complex, so we'll keep going before things get off track. Thankfully, after those 2 complicated hair shenanigans in a row, the wheel cut me some slack and gave me Fuyuhiko, someone who has barely any. I didn't have to spend a ton of time drawing some complicated hair, and since he's already a short man, it wouldn't be much out of place if the proportions were a little off. Still though, the scruffiness of the hair was enough of a surprise for me to have to do, since I had to resort to a thinner outline just to get the finer detail compared to the usual line thickness. It was also another case of having an extra layer to get the stripes of his clothing looking correct. Had this been earlier in the year, even any time before this challenge, I probably wouldn't have thought to put in a separate layer and cause myself a whole lot of trouble because of it. And that's the thing you learn when you teach yourself how to art. You figure out ways to give yourself less of a headache when you do something. Though, however, the headaches were still to come. Hifumi had very little motivation to draw, and he sat in place for a good few days once more. Even when picking a sprite that I didn't need to draw eyes, there was still a whole lot of stuff that I didn't even bother to do thanks to the burnout. Skipped out on giving proper shading, and also adding wrinkles to the clothes. The hands are also a little inconsistent between each other, and it almost looks like his left fist is disconnected from his sleeve. No idea why I settled on that, but I don't blame myself for overlooking it. Needing to scrape everything together in the span of a day or two was a common theme for the challenge, and it was definitely getting to be around this point. Pressing onwards after the defeat of Hifumi, I was given Gundam Tanaka. It was my intent that I would have included the 4 Dark Days of Destruction alongside him, but because the demotivation was still affecting me at this point, I could only finish Gundam himself. I even went and picked a good sprite that had all the Days in them, but time was of the essence, and the lack of working on the drawing was the reason I skipped them. Looking at a distance, the general outline of him looks pretty damn good, if I do say so myself. In addition, it was only until after time ran out that I realized I completely forgot I had his Hellhound earring, so I will hand wave it away by saying this was during Chapter 1 investigation of Goodbye Despair. Yep, that's my logic. I'm sticking to it. Can't convince me otherwise. When it came to drawing Aoi, I realized partway through that she had this weird Monokuma eye pattern on her shorts that I never really noticed until doing this drawing challenge. And now you've noticed too. Plus, just look at the proportions here! This is probably the best job I've done this year, and I think I needed something like that by this point in the year. A good amount of leg length compared to the torso, an accurate hairstyle, and there was enough time for some wrinkles on the shirt too! An overall good showing, methinks. Since I had already done Makoto and Byakuya by this point in the challenge, it seemed fitting to have done the sketch on the page of my notebook that had previous attempts at drawing all the students' heads. Shows how far I've come whilst doing this challenge. Also, understandably, the hair was reason enough to extend the image height in order to fit it all in. For the first time in a while, Shuichi happened to be a drawing that I finished a day or two early, giving me time to relax and do other things without consequence for that Sunday. Shuichi had a few options for poses to do, and I decided to pick this one as it seemed the best representation of this shy detective type. His legs could have been made thicker, admittedly, and the shoes could have been more balanced, but the rest of things are pretty good. I knew for a fact that the stripes on his clothing was going to be pretty pain, so it was the very last thing I did before even starting the shading part of the drawing. Really, I think Shuichi is where I started going on an upswing with my motivation. Getting it done sooner than the deadline gave me a well-earned, yet brief, break. As mentioned prior, I was honestly expecting the Ultimate Impossible to show up right after Byakuya did, which is why I was coy with how I wrote the Capcom for the tweet. That, and knowing I was going to be posting these in a place where not everyone would have played the games. Regardless, I knew that it had to be the same sprite that was painted for Byakuya before him, and I just had to make it nice and wide. The face on the sketch was quite small and weird, but that's to be expected by this point. Given that there were just 13 drawings left on the wheel at this point, it definitely gave me the needed motivation to press forward and complete the rest of the challenge. 38 weeks after the previous buff character, finally another one came up on the wheel, and look at those muscles. A lot of detailing was needed for those, so I made sure to get those done while I could. For another peek behind the curtain here, October happened to be a miserable month. There were a lot of little events that continued to build on themselves, and that was more than enough for me to continue to feel unmotivated to keep going with the challenge. Even so, I still did as much as I could, and had areas I had to leave alone like the skirt. I'm happy I managed to get Sakura's face to look good at least. Really, the nose is what ties it all together. Even with the state of October that was gonna transpire, I had some good motivation for Mukuro. She was completed by the Friday, giving me 2 days to relax and get stuff done. 2 whole days. There was a brief period where I considered drawing Mukuro outside of her Junko disguise, but I didn't think I could find a full reference that would coincide with the rest of the drawings. The hair on this one I think is the peak of the drawing. It ended up looking really good, even compared to Junko before her. I did say that the tie was probably a bit too thin, and nothing has changed from that front. But also the legs are probably a bit too thin near the bottom before the boots. Maybe I should have widened them up a little, but alas, I committed to what I had by the time I did the shading. Even then, just look at the sketch! Those legs are even more skinny than the finished version. Though fun fact about the sketch, I deliberately chose to draw Mukuro a page away from Junko, because it just seemed fitting. After Mukuro, we have our second Monokuma unit of the year, that being Usami and Monami. Initially, I had only drawn one sketch and I was intending to do just one of them. But then I thought, let's do another more positive pose and have that one be the Usami version. So I did just that. My mistake, however, was not keeping the pictures of the sketches relatively equal in size. The Monami sketch was large and the Usami sketch was small, which meant the line fillers looked off when compared to each other. Even with the multiple characters to draw here, I still finished earlier than the week's end, meaning I could go record another bunch of stuff for the channel. And as you saw, the most of that was the Isaac videos. But details. And right after Monami and Usami, we got the Monokuma at long last, to start the 10 character countdown to the end. At the beginning of the year, when I was expecting to see him sooner, my plan was to draw him in a triumphant pose, very similar to this specific shot from the Borderlands 2 intro. But when it came time for him to show up, I figured he would do better with this smug, inquisitive looking pose. Something you'd notice with the units that I did without reference is that I played the shading way too safely. They would have done better if the shading was a lot thicker than they are, as it doesn't match when placed next to the others. I feel like this is just me being safe and not stepping too far out of the comfort zone, but hey, with how I did it, the drawings got done quite a bit sooner than most of the others in the challenge. Monokuma only took 3 days to finish, same as Mikan all the way back on week 4. The wheel, however, must have known I had it too good for too long, as finally it was time for Ibuki to come up. Ibuki, if you've not seen her before, has some really elaborate hair, and I knew that was gonna suck immediately, so I left the hair for the last couple of days. There was also a couple of other complex parts to deal with here, like the leggings and the bracelets. But if you really step back and look at her, she has the same exact sailor outfit that a few of the other girls have in the series, so that was an easy choice to start with. Fittingly enough, thanks to all the elaborate parts, Ibuki was the one to tie the amount of layers with Kurumi, making them the de facto most complex characters in the challenge. I blame all the overlapping parts. Before we get started on Hajime, just look at the sketch. Look at how off it looks. The head is too squashed, the arms are too long, the legs are too short compared to the rest of the torso. It was a mess all around. Now compare that to what I produced digitally. A lot more confident, isn't it? It was a nice palette cleanser after all the hair stuff I had to do the prior week, and yet I still had to take a bit to get the hair looking alright. The doodle did also look a bit, I don't know, feminine, maybe? Maybe it would have been better if I had not added eyebrows this time. From one goofball to another, we have Kibo. Kibo is another case of having a cool design but knowing it'll be a pain to draw it, because all the moving parts to make up his entire body. I knew for a fact that I was going to have to leave it until later, which I did, but I didn't expect myself to leave it too much later and have to do it all in one day. In comparison, the face was colored on day 2, a whole 5 days prior to when I colored the body and by extension the rest of the drawing. Surprisingly though, he came out looking kinda good, especially given the goofy sketch and the cracked out doodle. Nakamura ended up being the last doodle-like effect chronologically onto the drawing page. He was right at the edge of things because of that. And speaking of running low on resources, the entire week I had to draw Nakamura ended up being out the house constantly, meaning a lack of time dedicated to actually drawing him. Since it got to the point where I was running low on time to finish him on the Sunday, I had to cut some corners and the shading on the chain. In all fairness though, I feel like I figured out his electrical eyebrow things quite well, even though they're still very blatantly just lines with an extra fill around it. Oh, and also it's the last of the bus students to draw. He radiates some power, doesn't he? Almost like a parallel to the beginning of the year, we go right back down to Himiko, another small character. I knew that she needed 3 pairs of layers in order to realize her to the fullest immediately. 1 pair for the main outline, and 1 for the hair as usual, but also an extra pair for the hat, as well as it being a good use for the hairpin and cuff pins. I could have picked a pose where she's happy and the hat is jumping up above her, but I think that one wouldn't best encapsulate how tight and lazy she usually is, so this one was the best option. The shoes were a surprising pain to get done. I didn't realize she had some bows to draw on there, but I can say a lot about most of the shoes of everyone because I'm not used to seeing them in full sprites compared to the usual torso upwards versions. The face on this sketch is kinda funny though. Looks real pissed for no reason. Chihiro was one of the most pleasant surprises that I had to do in the challenge, because it turns out that their sprites are very much not wrinkled overall, meaning I didn't have to feel bad if I ran out of time and couldn't add them. However, I didn't have to feel bad about running out of time because I finished the drawing on a Saturday again, giving me time to work on stuff once more. Sure, a lot of the video work this year has been mostly filling a backlog for this year to start uploading, but it's a guarantee that I have stuff to upload for a while. Anyways, I messed up the doodle by making the face a little thin, which meant the body had to also be thin in return, so it was all just a big dumb mistake. Happens to the best of us. To round out the Trigger Happy Havoc cast, here we have Sayaka. Part of me was expecting her to be either the very end or quite early on in the challenge, but yet here we are. It was around this point where the motivation I had from the beginning of the year had returned to me. allowing me to put my full effort into the last remaining characters to draw and showing off some great stuff in return. I truly think this is where I peaked. The skirt pattern took a bit, and the big bow is always something I forget she has for some reason, but really I think the hair is where the drawing shines. Made it a good enough size and made the strands look very good, though I'm unsure whether that makes her neck too long. Oh well. While the sketch is admittedly a little off in the head size, the completed drawing for Pecco I think is absolutely stellar. It really is these last few drawings where I think I've outdone myself, and I've given something that is very good. Even the doodle looks kinda good, though with just my signature small drawing style that meant the clothing wasn't very visible, so it could still be better if I just gave myself the space. And given that I knew the video was gonna need the extra time to get done, it's a little before finishing Pecco's drawing where I started typing up this very script that I'm speaking to you now. Though it isn't during this week where I started paraphrasing from the script, or even saying things. At the very end of the wheel, and the most current of these drawings, we have Angie Yonaga, the ultimate artist. The wheels had quite the sense of humour the entire challenge, giving me Feed immediately at the start, giving me Byakuya before Imposter but Junko before Mukuro, Mondo immediately following Kiyotaka, even Nagito and Kokichi right next to each other, those problem children. The biggest trick the wheel had yet to pull, though, was leaving the artist for last, as a capper for the whole challenge. No matter how much turmoil it put one of my friends in while I gave them a live update on whether Angie was ready to draw or not, I still feel proud of the outcome. I had gotten to the point where I started the shading on the Friday before I realized that I had forgotten the emblem mono coat the whole time, so I added that in very quickly. And of course, it took a whole year of doodling and being careful with how much space I had on the page, but it was right at the end where I accidentally pressed against a fresh shave and smudged Angie. How very poignant this whole week turned out to be. And there we go. That's all the drawings covered and the challenge completed. I'm happy that I was able to set a goal for myself like this and get it done, even with all the hardships and low periods during it. It's now proof that I have at least done something that I didn't give up partway through. It was at the expense of videos, yes, but I didn't realize it would hamper me this much until a few weeks into it. Would I have gotten more things done had I finished All Trades Abbey sooner? Part of me thinks yes. Things are still recorded, but it was that from the prior year that took a lot of time to do thanks to audio finagling, and there's more of that to do since there's a third Fortress being recorded, and even a fourth that was recorded after the script draft. So yes, thank you ever so much for staying tuned. I'll see you on whatever you watch next, and now that I'm free from the drawings, I can get back to working on getting videos edited and uploaded for you. I have some good stuff in the works. Here's to the new year, and see you when I see you next.